Good afternoon or good evening, everybody. Thank you for joining us tonight for our family information session, outlining changes in communicating student learning. We're excited to get started. Thank you so much for being here with us tonight. This session is recorded, so any of your friends that couldn't make it here on time will have a chance to view it at their leisure. We'll post it on our website, and yeah, we're excited to get started with this evening's session. But first, we want to acknowledge with respect the unceded and traditional lands and waters of the Squamish, Akameo, and the Shisha Nation, where we gather and we learn and we're collaborating here tonight with one another. I think it's really important that we recognize that assessment and reporting can be really powerful tools for equity. And they can be powerful levers for inclusion. So the importance of having, all students see themselves in their cultures and have their cultures reflected in our assessment and reporting practices, it just can't be understated. So I think the changes that we're going to talk about tonight, they rest on the spirit of inclusion for all children, for all families, and so that we can all engage together in supporting and being partners in learning. So I'm Kirsten Deasy. I'm District Principal of Learning, Innovation, and Childcare. And I'm so pleased to be here with you tonight. And I'm also really pleased to introduce Desiree Harris, District Vice Principal of Learning and Innovation.
Hi, everyone.
Today, or tonight for our agenda, we're going to talk about, what are the changes and why are there changes in how we're communicating student learning. We're going to give you some updates to assessment and evaluation. We're going to provide some updates on reporting itself. And then we're going to talk about the Spaces ePortfolio platform a little bit as well. So you'll get lots of information tonight. And thank you for sending your questions ahead. We're going to do our best to embed the answers to the questions throughout our session tonight. And yeah, we're excited to get started.
So we'll just start by looking at why the policy is changing. And one of the reasons why it's changing is to keep education in line with the latest research. So UBC, University of Victoria, and the Vancouver Island University did a review of all the current academic research and literature on assessment, evaluation, and reporting. And these findings of these studies help to shape BC's new reporting policy. So the aspects of these findings include student self-assessment, formative assessment, a focus on proficiency, and meaningful communication. So student self-assessment leads to an increase in student confidence in their abilities, greater responsibility for their own learning, and just a greater satisfaction overall. Formative assessment, there has been a shift towards this globally, and it keeps students regularly informed of where they're at in their learning and how they can move forward. The focus on proficiency allows all students to reach proficiency. That's the goal. And it also helps student assessment reliability because it's focused on the learning standards from the curriculum. And then researchers also stress the importance of just ongoing, comprehensive, and timely communication with parents and caregivers. So effective communication between home and school has a positive impact on student learning and engagement. The policy brings assessment and reporting in line with the redesigned curriculum, which is really important because the curriculum was redesigned in 2015. The redesigned curriculum is grounded in the First People's principles of learning, which are interwoven throughout the daily teaching practices. You should also know that Indigenous content perspectives, and values are also included in every area of learning in the curriculum. The core competencies are also woven through the entire curriculum. So students are learning to develop communication, thinking, and personal and social competencies through each area of learning. And then literacy and numeracy are also embedded in every area of learning to ensure that all students become literate and numerate. Other aspects of the redesigned curriculum include the specific areas for each subject, which include the content. And the content is the know part of the curriculum. So it details the topics that are taught in each grade level and subject area. There's also a set of subject-specific curricular competencies for each area. These are known as the do part of the curriculum because they basically outline what depth and level of thinking are required for the content. And then there's the big ideas for each subject, which are the understand part of the curriculum. So the idea with the big ideas is that students will walk away from the course with a larger understanding of a number of big topics. So together, the content and curricular competencies make up what we call the learning standards. And the learning standards are assessed and taught together. And in fact, students are assessed only on the learning standards, which we'll discuss a little bit more in the next slide. But there are a small number of students that may not be assessed on the learning standards if they're on a modified program. Those students will be assessed on their IEP goals, but it's a small number of students and all other students are assessed on the learning standards.
So I think it's really important what Des is saying there about assessment referring to the learning standards in the curriculum. And a change is that we're really being intentional about not having attendance and behavior be part of that assessment of learning. It's important that we sort of separate those. Attendance and behavior and work habits aren't factored into a student's overall mark. And the reason is because assessment shouldn't really be a disciplinary tool. It's best if it's kept separate from, if we can isolate learning and how a child is doing in their learning, it's really helpful. And yes, we'll still communicate with you about attendance and behavior. That's still really important. But there's other ways of doing that and at other times when we'll do that. So reporting on student learning habits and engagement and behavior is done separately from when we're assessing on academics. The other thing that's important to know about the new reporting policy is that it's culturally informed practices. So culturally informed assessment practices allow students flexibility so that they can bring their own cultural identities into how they demonstrate their learning. So teachers are going to be making sure to honor practices like oral language traditions, where students will have the opportunity to tell about their learning, to talk about their learning. Maybe they'll be talking with small groups in collaborative learning opportunities, and teachers will be assessing their learning that way. They'll be able to demonstrate their learning in all sorts of flexible ways. So perhaps a portfolio might be used, and the student will be able to use multimedia like video or make a PowerPoint, and their culture will be able to be, will shine through in those examples of how they demonstrate their learning. Projects are great examples where students will have an opportunity to, have choice over what it is that they focus on, still focusing on the learning standards, but the actual topic might be a choice for a student. And that way they would be able to choose something that they felt attached to and a topic they're engaged in. And this allows for their culture to be reflected and to shine. So all of these practices like self-assessment, student self-assessment, sort of flexible and multimedia ways of assessing, they allow for culture to come through. And that's an important piece in this curriculum.
Yeah, and as Kristen mentioned before, the reporting policy is really developed in the spirit of equitable and inclusive assessment and reporting practices. So assessment and reporting should be inclusive of all learners. And one way that it is inclusive practices for assessment is that students have a choice in the way they express and represent their learning, as well as multiple ways to practice and demonstrate their learning. Another aspect of inclusive assessment is that all students are entitled to receive assessment supports without being penalized for this. So there's lots of different assessment supports available to students. For example, if they need extra time writing a test, or if a student needs some assistive technology, such as talk to text, those will be available to students and they won't be penalized for using those. And using inclusive assessment practices, it doesn't in any way mean that we're lowering expectations for students. It just means that we're honoring the diversity among learners. And then there's inclusive reporting, which means that reporting is communicated and student learning is communicated in the same way to all students. And we will discuss that in a little bit more depth later on. Another change to assessment is using a wider variety of evidence of learning. So we know that learning is happening all the time in the classroom. And so teachers can collect evidence from all different types of assessments that include things like products, such as tests or assignments, or projects, conversations, which might include discussions with the class or with individual student conferences, and then observations, which might include something like presentations or the teacher questioning students. So after the teacher collects evidence from all these different areas, they can then use their professional judgment to determine where the student is at in their learning.
Okay, now another important thing to note is that averaging has been removed. So we're no longer using the practice of averaging to get a mark. And this will be K to grade 12 all the way through, because it doesn't provide an accurate picture of learning. And instead, what's going to be happening is that we're going to be taking the learning that has happened closest to when the reporting is going to be taking place, because that provides the strongest evidence of learning. So let's give an example of this. So imagine that you decide that you would like to jump out of an airplane and learn how to parachute. So you sign up for something, you show up at the place where you're going to be taught, you do all the lessons and practice times, you sign all the consent forms, you've been practicing all morning and you're getting ready to go up in the airplane now, but it's time to get your parachute. And so there's a bunch of parachutes out and the instructors say, oh, what parachute do you want? Do you want one packed by Abigail? Do you want one packed by Ben? Or would you like a parachute packed by Charlie? And you say, I don't actually know. And the instructors say, well, you know what? They all have the same average. They're all about the same at packing a parachute. They've got the exact same average. And you think, oh, okay, I guess I'll just choose Ben's then. But if you'd had a chance to take a closer look at what was behind Ben's average, you might see that Ben was not the best choice. Because although Ben started out as pretty good at parachute packing, he quickly declined. And it was pretty steady decline where he wasn't very good at packing his parachute. Maybe something happened to poor Ben along the way. Maybe he had a hand injury or something and he couldn't pack his parachute anymore. And so the learning that he was showing or demonstrating closest to when your parachute was being packed was not very good. Whereas Abigail, well, she didn't start out knowing how to pack a parachute, just like a lot of our students don't start out knowing everything in a course. But we don't want to penalize them for that. We want to expect that somebody doesn't know what they've signed up for. They don't know the content yet, and they don't have all those competencies. That's why they're in the course. So they're going to be learning and practicing and getting better and better at learning and understanding those goals of the course, so that, like Abigail, by the end of the course, they're hopefully going to be able to demonstrate their learning in really consistent ways and high standards. And then there's Charlie. Well, Charlie's sort of all over the place, and that would be good to know too if he was packing your parachute. So I think it's good to understand that, the learning that takes place closest to when you are going up in that airplane or getting assessed if you're a student is the learning that's most relevant. Okay.
There's also some changes in terms of how students are evaluated. So there's something called criterion reference evaluation, which is in the new reporting policy, and it will now be used for all students from kindergarten to grade 12. And it means that the work that the students do, the criteria comes straight from the curriculum. So when we talked about the learning standards, which again includes the content and curricular competencies, those in the curriculum, it talks about the proficient level. So it describes the proficient level for the content and curricular competencies in the curriculum. So when we take that from the curriculum and use it as our criteria for assignments and assessments, it adds a lot more reliability and accuracy of assessment results, because all students are being assessed on the same criteria, and it's really clear to the teacher and the students what the specific criteria is because it's outlined in the curriculum. So instead of having an assignment that might have some really vague requirements, it ends up being really clear to the student what is expected of them and what they need to do to progress and produce further learning. So the benefits of this are many. Like I said, it improves accuracy and reliability of assessment results, but it also empowers the student to take ownership of their own learning because they can see the criteria that's clearly there. It also gives them very clear information about what they need to do to move their learning forward. It makes the expectations really clear, allowing all students to succeed because there's no guesswork involved as to what they're expected to do. It also holds all students accountable to a high standard of learning because marks are based on these specific criteria. And again, the criteria is the same for everyone. So this goes really well with the new proficiency scale, which is another change coming in with the new reporting policy. So all students from kindergarten to grade 9 will be reported on using the proficiency scale for all areas of learning. So in the student's report card, you will see reference to these proficiency scale descriptors, which are emerging, developing, proficient, and extending. So there's many benefits of using this scale as well, including that learning is seen as a continuous process. So as you can see, there's the arrow there pointing in both directions. So students might enter in at any point and might move around the scale as they're learning new skills and new content. And so there's nothing bad associated with sliding around this scale as students are learning. And when they go into the next year, they might slide around the scale again. So It also maintains a high standard for all students because the goal is for all students to reach proficiency. It also helps students have a better understanding of their learning because it's focusing on next steps. And again, it increases student engagement and empowers them because they feel like they have some control over their learning and what they're expected to do because they can see where that is on the scale with the previous criteria that we talked about. So it does foster hope and efficacy and a culture of learning. And it also produces improved reliability and of assessment results. An important thing to note here is that this scale does not translate to a traditional ABCD. It is not the same as ABCD. It is what we call a qualitative standards-based scale. So what's required in each level is actually through a description rather than numbers and letters. So as I mentioned, the goal is for everyone to reach proficiency. That's the goal. Extending is not the goal. So extending is not for completing more work. It's not for putting in greater effort or for making things look attractive. It's about going into a greater depth and complexity. So with the emerging, the student has an initial understanding. Then in developing, a partial understanding. Proficient is a complete understanding, and extended is a sophisticated understanding. And we'll give you a little example of that using an analogy of learning how to drive a car. So if we consider someone who's learning how to drive a car, when they're at the emerging level, they haven't even started driving yet. They haven't driven the car yet. They're just checking out what are the different parts of the car. What do these pedals do? What does the speedometer do? Learning about all the parts of the car and how they work with the car when you're driving. And they would also be studying for their learners tests. So learning about all the rules of the road. What do all the signs mean and things like that. So really just that initial understanding of what it means to drive and what all the rules of the road are. And then when they're at the developing level, they're learning how to start the car and to practice driving. So this is where they're going to spend most of their time because they're really practicing all those different skills involved that you have to juggle when you're learning how to drive. And then once they become proficient, they've passed their driver's test and they're able to drive using all the complexity of the driving skills combined. And that's when they become proficient. And it wouldn't be extending unless the student really went into a greater depth and complexity. So in driving a car, this would be like going into further learning. So like learning how to get your class 1 and then getting your class 1 and working as a professional driver, or say becoming a race car driver, something like that. So as you can see in this example, you do need to go through those various stages of learning before you are proficient at a skill. So it's normal for people to go through the emerging and developing level before they become proficient at something. So it's not a bad thing to be emerging or developing. It's just those different parts of the learning process that everyone has to go through when they approach something new. As you can see from this example as well, reaching extending is not going to be always for everybody, right? So it does mean putting in further study and greater depth and complexity in the area.
Thanks, Desiree. That's a good example. I don't need to be a race car driver, but I could still be proficient at driving. Now we wanted to just talk about IE, or what we're calling insufficient evidence of learning. And this is a change as well. It's, I think what's important to recognize here is that IE will be assigned if a student hasn't provided enough evidence of their learning to be assessed accurately. So a student will then have the opportunity to be placed on the scale, but will need some further time and development in order to do that. So imagine this could be something that was used if a student just moved into a school and there was a reporting time coming, but the teacher just didn't have a chance to get to know that student yet. So instead of giving them an F or a D, they would just give them an insufficient, an IE, insufficient evidence of learning. Or maybe a student has been away from school for a long time, and so they haven't been able to demonstrate their learning. So again, IE could be given to that student, and they'd have an opportunity to do the learning over time. Or maybe students below 50%, and they need more opportunities to show their learning. Maybe there's some language skills that are developing. There's all sorts of reasons. Maybe something's been happening in that child's family life or personal life. And instead of being punitive, again, we're being responsive and providing opportunities for that student to demonstrate their learning with a bit more time. So a plan would be in place for those students. And this would strongly signal to everybody that, you know, it's acknowledged that we don't have enough evidence to provide proficiency, and that there's going to be a plan in place to support that student in growing and learning. So what will reporting look like? So My Education is being used by all teachers on the Sunshine Coast. Teachers have been using this for several years. And so parents will be receiving information through My Education. And like I said, this is not new to parents. If you want to have a printed copy, almost all schools actually automatically send home a printed copy and will communicate with you using like a phone call or something to say the MyEd reports are ready. And so you can check your child's backpack to find it. And there's a couple schools that parents will log into MyEd. Parents can check MyEd anytime. And for some schools, secondary, they can check MyEd, and then they can request a paper copy if they prefer that. So just talk to your school if you would like support with accessing MyEd, or if you'd like a paper copy printed and that hasn't been done, it's very easy for us to do. So the admin assistants at the schools can do that. Just check in with the schools. So the reporting will look a little bit different now. We're all students, kindergarten to grade 12, who are taking year-long classes, so linear classes that last the whole school year, September to June. The schedule is going to be a little bit different. So we're going to have 2 informal learning updates. So in our district, we often think of those in elementary as conferences. And in secondary, parents often go into the secondary school too and can conference with teachers as well. So one of our learning updates actually took place already in early October. So we've actually had one of the informal learning updates in our district. And then we have 2 written learning updates that are happening throughout the year, and then 1 summary of learning. So I'll just back up a little bit. And we just had in elementary and secondary, our informal learning updates happen at about the 2nd week of October. And then that was our informal learning update. And then we're going to have our written learning updates taking place at the end of November if you're in secondary, and in the beginning of December if you're in elementary. And then there'll be an informal learning update that happens at around March, and then a written learning update in April-ish. And then in June, we'll have that summary of learning. And this will be slightly modified for students that are in semester courses in secondary. They'll have 1 informal learning update, one written learning update, and then one summary of learning, because those are shorter periods of time. They usually run September to end of January. So that provides some information for you. We also got a question about honor roll and whether there's still honor roll. And schools are not using honor rolls anymore. It's been about 4 years for schools on the Sunshine Coast. There's a lot of research that external rewards like that actually don't motivate students and actually can do the opposite. So moving away from honor roll, but just celebrating individual learning and growth along the way. And then we thought we'd give you just a little bit more information about the informal learning updates. So in elementary, these are often just thought of as conferences. Parent-teacher conferences is what we do, and sometimes three-way conferences is what they're called. And these provide families and students with brief information about how their students are doing in class. And these updates are meant to sort of occur early in the learning so that students and parents can have time to respond to teachers' feedback and to make a plan around supporting that student. Informal learning updates will be family conferences at the elementary level, and there'll be a document as well in the secondary level. So these documents will be sent home for students. You'll be notified about when they're going to be coming home so that you can check in with your student, find it in their backpacks. And then these documents will sort of include information about student behavior, attitude, work habits, and attendance. There'll be opportunities for students to self-assess on these documents, and there'll also be opportunities for teachers to provide input and comments. So those went home about a week ago, maybe a little bit more than a week ago now. And yeah, they're a really wonderful way to communicate and support that team of approach so that we're all supporting students in all of those different aspects that can affect learning and growth.
So just to give you a little bit more information of what the report cards are going to contain. So as Kristen mentioned, the report cards are now called written learning updates and the summary of learning at the end of the course. In those report cards, so in those written learning updates and the summary of learning, there's what we call descriptive feedback. So descriptive feedback is new. There were always comments on the report cards, but the descriptive feedback includes specific elements. And so what those are is it'll include a strength-based comment on what students can currently do in relation to the learning standards in the curriculum. So you'll notice a theme, a trend happening here where we're talking about the learning standards in the curriculum and then the learning standards in the assessment and evaluation. And now they're linking to the report cards as well. So a strength-based comment about what the students can do in terms of the learning standards. The written descriptive feedback will also include information about next steps for future growth. So what the student can do to further their learning. And this might also include things like specific strategies that the student could use to further their learning, or a list of specific types of supports that the student has available to them that might benefit them. And then you'll also see a description on student behavior, which includes things, as Kristen mentioned in the previous slide, things like work habits, engagement, participation, specific interests that the student might have in class, and things like attitude or general strength. So those are the elements of the written descriptive feedback and summary of learning. And just so you know, the summary of learning is essentially just another written learning update. It's just a call to summary because it's at the end of the year. All students in grades 10 to 12 will also receive a graduation status update with their summary of learning. So that'll occur if it's a semestered course, it'll occur at the end of the semester. If it's a full year course, that'll be at the end of the year with the summary of learning. So what the graduation status update does is it ensures that all parents and caregivers have specific information about what grad path the student or child is on, and what requirements need attention for them to graduate. So the graduation status update includes things like information about the different grad paths that a student could take, the specific graduation program that your student is currently on, and the requirements for that grad path, as well as an indication of the student's progress towards those requirements and what still needs to be done. And then there's also going to be a record of what provincial assessments the student has completed and which ones still need to be completed for graduation. So this is a really good way for families and students to know what is expected of them for graduation and what things might need further attention, so they could go meet with a counselor to talk about it if they need to. Also, a new requirement is that students reflect on the core competencies and set goals a minimum of 3 times per year. They will be doing it a little bit more frequently at the secondary level because of the semestered system mostly. Parents and caregivers are supposed to be able to see these reflections and goals. So we'll be doing that on Spaces, which we'll talk a little bit more in a sec. But I just want to talk about the research around self-reflection on the core competencies and goal setting, because it can play a really big role in helping students learn, grow, and have an accurate perception of themselves and their own learning. It also allows for cultural expression, personalization, and for their voices to be heard, because it's really important that students have voice, and that increases student engagement as well. So student self-assessment on the core competencies and goal setting will be included in the written learning updates and the summary of learning, but they won't be made available through Maya, they'll be available through Spaces. And so students will do these reflections and set goals and post it to Spaces. And then parents and caregivers can view these reflections and goals by using their Spaces family account. And we have sent out a bunch of information on this through School Messenger, but we also had a Spaces parent and caregiver information session recently, and that is recorded and posted on the school website. We'll be having another one coming up soon. Kristen, is that November 15th?
Yeah, I think so.
November 15th. So you can keep your eye out for that. It's going to be a repeat of the one that happened recently, but if you didn't get a chance to go to that one, then we do recommend joining in that Zoom session, because it is very informative about how to use Spaces to access your family account and to see your child's or student's reflections and goals. And Spaces does offer really exciting opportunities to showcase student voice through a multimedia platform. So student portfolios can then be carried through their entire schooling experience, all the way from kindergarten to grade 12. So it's a really neat, unique way for students and families to be able to go back and reflect on learning over time.
Yeah, it's so amazing when you see and you hear those voices of the kindergarten students talking about their goals, and often they're things like, navigating the monkey bars. And then you hear the older students reflecting on, the careers that they hope to embark on, and the goals that they have around, what they'll earn and what kind of education they'll need. It's just amazing to hear their voices. So yeah, we're really excited about Spaces. So just as a summary now, we want to give you a little bit of a summary on the new reporting policy. I think one of the most important and foundational pieces is that it's the changes are designed to support strong relationships and communication between educators in schools, teachers, and students and families. So really, really, making sure that we're having good conversations early in the year with those informal learning updates that help us connect and understand the kind of roles that we can play and the goals that students have in their learning. And then, frequent and spaced out communication happening over time where parents are really, really, and families are really, really involved and honored as part of that. And so are students. So it also really honors different learning styles and different ways of expressing learning. So, we talked about how portfolios and projects are really valued tools and forms of expression that students can use to provide evidence of their learning. And that honors that, not everybody loves to write an essay for all of their, to demonstrate their learning. They don't all want to use paper and pencil. Maybe they really want to be able to use multimedia. Maybe they want to be able to do a presentation for the class. Maybe they want to have a conversation with the teacher that really shows the depth of understanding that they have about a subject. And this all points to the fact that schools are trying to develop 21st century learners. So if we tried to guess what the future was going to be like for the students that are now in kindergarten, it would be really hard for us to know what kind of jobs they could be applying for. We can't really imagine the future careers that they're going to have because those future careers don't actually exist right now. So really understanding that we really need to develop students that have these flexibilities in their learning, that we really value what students know. So the content is really important. And so is that they can do something with that knowledge, that they can show that they can apply that knowledge and that they understand that knowledge in really deep ways. So that's that know, do, and understand. And that's what's really important for our 21st century learners. And it's reflected throughout our curriculum, and now it's reflected in our assessment practices as well. The other thing that we talked about is just how important it is that these practices, these assessment practices that we use, uphold Indigenous informed pedagogies. We know that First Peoples principles of learning are foundational. Literacy and numeracy are also foundational. And yet for students to be able to express themselves in ways that have their culture shine through is so important. We want to celebrate the individuality of all of our students and celebrate the cultures that they bring to our classrooms. So these assessment methods really allow for that and support that. I think another really important consideration is that these assessment practices allow for more accurate and reliable assessment results. We're not just comparing students to other students in the class. We're comparing them to learning standards, and all students have that same ability to understand what those learning standards are. There's transparency there so that they can really understand where they are in moving towards those learning standards. And that descriptive feedback that's embedded in along the way is designed to provide them with information about their learning and about what their next steps in learning could be, so that we're really getting that accuracy and reliability of assessment results as well. It views learning as continuous, right? Marks do signal an end to the learning. I don't know about you, but I've been guilty of getting a mark back on a test and thinking, okay, good, I can just forget about everything that I just memorized and I can move on. And really, we wanted to emphasize that learning is continuous, right? That we're all on these journeys where we're interested in different things and we're doing our best to learn with depth about different topics. And learning shouldn't be signaled by somebody else as over, right? It should be something that students have that opportunity to engage in and deepen. And all of these practices are designed to increase student engagement, and student engagement is critical in learning. It's that foundational piece. There are many, many factors that we contend with now, all of us, for attention, and to build on practices that really capitalize on engagement by providing choice, by providing individuality and personalization, by providing opportunities for your own story to shine through. All of these things encourage engagement. And they also encourage hope. And hope is critical. You know, when we talked about averaging marks, you know, if you're given a mark at the very beginning of a course, when you don't know anything about the course, because you've just started the course, but that mark is maybe not the highest mark. And then it is actually held against you all the way along in that course. So that if you got a 30 out of 100 on the first 2 assessments that were provided in a class, that might mean that you can never receive a higher mark in that class, because the averaging would mean that that couldn't take place. So we're really wanting to provide students with hope that if they work hard and they apply themselves, that they will be able to reach their goals, and we are there to support them in doing that. And that provides a sense of efficacy, where students have that sense of, if they work hard and they apply themselves and they work collaboratively with the educators that are there to guide them and working together with families, that provides them that sense that of feeling like they can do this. And that's efficacy that's so important. So how can you support your child and your student? Well, I think there's some really important things that parents and families can do, starting with like asking about their core competency reflections. Ask them, what did they post on Spaces? How do they think that they're doing in their communication skills or in their thinking skills, their critical thinking or their creative thinking or their personal and social awareness? That would be a great way to have a conversation with your child about their core competencies. When I think about my core competencies, that they are embedded in almost everything I do. And I really try to be intentional about getting better at them. And so talking with your child about how you focus on your core competencies and what they're focusing on would be a wonderful way to have conversations with them about their learning. Ask them about their goals. Students are posting their goals on Spaces, and you know, they're making their goals visible. So talking about their goals and asking about what steps they've been taking really honors them as being active agents in their learning. And it normalizes goal setting. So I always talk about my own goals too, and try to learn with my kids about the kind of things that we're all trying to learn and grow in. So goal setting is one of those things that's lifelong. And the more we can check in with each other and cheerlead, the better off that we are. Attend those conferences. So those informal learning updates, you are invited into schools and to have these conversations so that you can be meeting with the educators and with your student and you all together to set those goals together and to be part of that conversation and part of that plan that's moving learning forward. Reviewing their informal learning update documents together. So in secondary, our students all brought home documents, and they have information that the students have provided about their own self-assessments on their work habits and their behavior and their attendance. These can provide really great springboards for conversation. And then talking about the teacher feedback as well. What did the teacher say? What was their advice? Did they have any additional comments? Those would be really great conversations you can have with your student. And just basically being that partner in learning. I think that's what the spirit of this new reporting policy is all about. It's what the curriculum is founded on. And we're so appreciate having parents here that are interested in this and really wanting to support their teachers and their children as learners and be part of that partnership in that learning. And then finally, just celebrating. I think as parents, it's just so important. We have this opportunity to cheerlead and to recognize, you know, your children best. So recognize how they're learning and how they're growing, and really show that appreciation for them so that your children really feel like the learning and the progress that they're making is being seen and noticed. So we've talked about so many things today. Thank you so much for being part of this session with us. Desiree and I were really excited to be able to have this opportunity. This session will be recorded, so you'll be able to come back and watch it if you like. You'll also be able to tell anybody who missed the session that they can find it on our website. It will be posted there. If you ever have questions, you can reach out to your school, reach out to the principal of your school with any questions, or to your child's teachers, and they can help find the answers to those questions for you. You're also welcome to reach out to Desiree and I at any time. We're available to support you and answer questions. And we just want to thank you for being here with us tonight. It's been a really wonderful way to celebrate the new reporting policy and have some opportunities to talk about all of the benefits that we see. Okay, thank you so much, everybody.
Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.